are talking Final Summer. This is written, directed and produced by John Isberg and is essentially a love letter to the slasher movies of the 80s. Yes, so if you're a fan of slasher movies, you may be interested in this one. What is the story of Final Summer? Well, it centres on a summer camp, which is a thing that you have in America apparently. We don't really have them in the UK. And we have these kind of camp counsellors or whatever you have them at the kind of the end of the season, yada yada, and they're kind of finishing up, and the owner of this kind of camp says that she's selling up, so this is kind of like the final one and what have you. And on this kind of particular kind of night, there is a masked killer on the loose, hunting down anyone who's left in this kind of camp, and slashing his way through the survivors. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So yes, it is a somewhat vanilla slasher movie. Let's talk about what works. So this thing, the thing of this movie, we'll get into what doesn't work, right? But you have to be honest when you watch this. I think it's fairly well put together on a technical standpoint. This movie has some competent people behind the scenes in regards to the technical abilities. It's fairly well put together. There's decent cinematography. It's kind of well put together in regards to like editing, sound design, things like this, shot composition. I gotta say, all of that stuff is pretty good. I mean, it's not outstanding. It's not like particularly kind of like, this is so, unique or whatever. But it's competent. It's competently put together. The movie feels like it's put together by people who know what they are doing on a technical standpoint. That might sound like a real kind of like, bottom of the barrel compliment, but it's true. It's the thing that struck me most about this movie. It feels like it is put together pretty well. I have to say, I kind of liked our killer. It's not the particularly, it's a relatively kind of like throwaway costume in some ways. We have this kind of mask, but in a way I kind of quite like the more tactical kind of usage of it. He's just a guy in kind of jeans and a jacket and a kind of like almost like a morph suit type mask. But I felt it gave the killer the ability to be able to kind of move around a little better than maybe some of the more kind of like the bulky costumes you see in a lot of these movies, or a mask. If it just came kind of like, out of place, you wouldn't be able to see. I always think that with these big masks or thick masks, all you've got to do is like move the mask out of the way, and this person, the killer, wouldn't be able to see. But with this, where it's essentially like a stocking, you'll be able to see out of it, whatever. So it kind of, I appreciate the kind of the tacticalness of what this kind of get up would be able to get you to do. And I have to say, the movie does have a few kind of brutal moments. The kills, there are a couple of kind of like brutal looking kills. It's not a gory film, really, which I think was a little bit of a missed opportunity. But nonetheless, we see kind of axes kind of getting buried into people, at least from a little bit of a distance, and it looks like there's a bit of a swing on there. So the kills are not bloody, but they're kind of like, they feel like there's force behind it when a blow is struck, for example. Is kind of what I'm getting at there. I think the acting is fine. I think everyone does an okay job here. There was no clunkers in regards to acting. Characterization, that's a whole different story, and we're going to talk about that. But the acting, I think, was all okay from the casting. There was no one who stuck out. There was a little bit of kind of cheesy dialogue, which I don't think helped with some of the portrayals, but I think it was more the writing than the actual kind of acting performance, to be honest with you. And the movie tries to have some kind of, knowing winks to the audience in regards to kind of like the horror movie tropes that we've seen. I mean, this movie is very much trying to appeal to fans of this genre, and by having, like, for example, a character kind of like do that. I can't do it. The kind of like the Friday the 13th kind of like theme and things like this, and references to kind of like horror movies and stuff. So, you know, it obviously has reverence for the movies that it's trying to imitate, although it does incorporate, I would say, some elements of Scream in it as well. Clearly it's obviously taking place in 91, but we have a prologue set in, I think, 86. So it's kind of a mix of really, I would say, the kind of, mainly the 80s horror, but a little bit of the kind of the 90s horror sort of slashers like Scream and stuff like that as well, especially in regards to the kind of like the whodunit aspect of the movie. Okay, so let's transition to what doesn't work. Here is the biggest issue with this movie. Well, there's two big issues. One I feel is going to be the thing that most people complain about, and I think it is a problem, but it's not a massive detriment to a certain degree. And that is this movie is so generic. It is so vanilla. It is such a run-of-the-mill slasher movie. It is nothing kind of like outstanding, nothing unique. It is everything you have seen before. Doesn't necessarily mean it's done in a horrible and bad way, like I've mentioned, apart from one thing which I'm going to come on to. But it absolutely does not stand out from the crowd whatsoever. I mean, it is just anything you've seen before in a slasher movie, this film does it again. And it's just like, you know, it's why make a film where it absolutely does not stand out from the crowd so much? It just feels like such a kind of like you've seen it all before. It's not trying to do anything new. There's no new ideas. In actual fact, it's trying to replicate pre-existing ideas, like having this killer, you know, on a kind of like a summer camp sort of scenario. There's loads of movies that have been on that. Why do it? I mean, I think the film thinks that it's kind of like, oh, people will like it because that's the kind of like thing that we've seen before. But I've got to say, it ends up just being like almost like a carbon copy, and people, I think, will be not too thrilled with it in that regard. It doesn't feel like it's kind of like a fun kind of throwback in a way. It just feels like it's kind of like doesn't have any ideas for itself. And that is, I think, probably going to be the overriding issue I feel with this movie. The other issue for me that I think, I mean, if a movie is not original, it isn't original, but it still can be entertaining. There's films that I've seen where it's not been original and more or less been irreverent, but you can still watch it and kind of, you know, enjoy it. How many times have we, you know, have we seen The Most Dangerous Game done again and again, just to name kind of one example. But the big thing for me that I think really kind of damaged this movie was the real lack of characterization. I couldn't tell you anything about any of these characters. These characters had no depth to them whatsoever. I mean, there's just like nothing to them. I mean, I think eventually by the end oh yes, our main girl had like a younger brother or something where something happened, but that's about it. And that's right, really. You don't really know any more than that. There is a serious lack of characterization. I've often complained on this channel where we have independent movie makers who are the writer, the director, the producer, and it rarely, if ever, I think works because there is no one to push back on. There's no one to say, check your kind of impulses, okay? I know what you want to do, but have a look think about this more commercially. It happens nearly every time. And unfortunately, this is why a movie should be a collaborative process. And I get some people want to have ownership of their ideas and kind of want to see them through. But you need to ask for criticism. You need to be able to kind of say, how does this play to an audience which is not connected to the film? Not a friend or a family member who's just going to go, yeah, that's great. Because this is what happens. You just get an absolute kind of like generic movie that isn't, I would say, a terrible film, but it absolutely doesn't stand out from the crowd. And the one thing I would say it severely lacks in is to say the characterization needs you don't care about these characters because you don't know them. So it's just like a bunch of kind of nobodies getting killed in a kind of very average looking movie. The movie could have gone to more of it could have been like a hardcore gore film. that might have, you know, it made it stand out a little bit, but it doesn't do that. And then we have cheesy kind of dialogue with villains monologuing, you know, things like this. We have very obvious foreshadowing. Let me give you an example. Don't do this near this particular thing, otherwise that might happen. I don't want to spoil it for you, but, you know, it's like, okay, so clearly that's going to happen later on in the film then. You know, I know the kind of the film techniques are to set stuff up, but it's so obvious sometimes. I mean, it needs to be done more subtly. So, you know, the actors aren't bad, but the characters are so paper thin, you just don't care. And like I said, some of the dialogue here is just like cringy a little bit. So, you know, what do we think about this film then? I mean, if you're just a slasher aficionado and you just want to watch every slasher, this is to say, it's not a badly made film. You know, it ticks boxes. You know, have we had that? Have we had this? Have we had that? Yes, yes, yes. It's very much you've seen before. It has zero new ideas. It brings nothing new to the table, and it's just regurgitating past films that you've seen, and doesn't stand out in any way. But it's not, as I say, a terrible film. There's certainly worse slasher films. I mean, bloody hell, we see enough of them come out from the UK pretending to be American. But this one, unfortunately, because I think this movie, the production value in regards to the technical elements seem very good. It just seems like a waste of an opportunity to have an absolutely kind of zero imagination in this kind of movie in regards to the narrative or the characters or the killer. It just seems so generic. So I would normally say in that regard to give it a 5, but the thing that knocked it down to a 4 for me is the real lack of characterization, because that's an unforgivable sin in a movie like this, to have really characters that are absolutely paper thin. So for me, that knocked it down to a 4. So it's a 4 out of 10. If you don't care about characters, you might just want to watch a killer going around hacking people up. Great. But for me, it's a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment. I look forward to